So good afternoon, everybody. So before we start, we just need to give a quick brief for our audience regarding the UAE National Wellbeing Strategy. The strategy was announced recently, and it has four main principles. Focus on people well-being as a measure of sustainable and tangible societal progress. Adopt a holistic government approach to people's well-being based on integration between different sectors. Define roles and responsibilities for government entities and integrate public, private, people efforts together. Respond to the implication of future and global trends and challenges. So let's start with Saeed. So Saeed, from your point of view, the integration between the government and the private sector, how it should be established in order to assure more delivery of healthy buildings and sustainable buildings and communities?
Firstly, pleasure to be here, and a very good question in terms of the roles of the private and public sector around a new strategy related to healthy buildings. To me, I don't think it's necessarily vastly different to any other strategies, visions around trying to create a change in built environment or infrastructure. The role of the government is really to set the platform baseline and be an enabler for the private sector to innovate, to move forward and find solutions. And I think what we're seeing from the strategy, it's set out the framework for what the government wants to achieve, which is really important because that needs to set the direction for I guess other government departments to follow, but also the private sector and individuals. And really then, the role of the private sector is really to drive the innovation and to achieve that. So, I mean, to give the reference on the journey that sort of sustainable buildings have gone through and the role of public and private sector on that, the government set out, what we need to achieve. These are the targets, these are the goals. The private sector innovates, adapts, develop solutions to that. Those get captured again by the government to embed back into sort of strategies, policies and regulations. And I see that cycle continuing in this regard as well.
Great. So do you see that the framework is already on the track and there are some achievement happening regarding the integration between both?
Definitely. I think when you see, and again, I've been involved in various government working groups and committees around setting new strategies or policies or regulations. And what you often see is these new strategies, policies and regulations that come through, effectively is that one of the first things you look at is how do you capture progress and best practice. If you look at the spectrum through industry, anything the government releases globally around a new regulation, a new strategy, a new framework, it's never something that hasn't been done before. Because traditionally, the role of government is to set the platform. What is best practice? Let's enable that. So a lot of what's being spoken about, written about, and captured in these strategies is being achieved by the what you can call the sort of market leaders and those that are developing and implementing best practice. And really the role of a strategy and regulation from there is what's the top 5% of the market doing? What are they achieving? How do we make sure that the rest of the 95% of the market and industry follow? And I think very much when you review this document, there's nothing in there that's never been achieved before, which is important because otherwise if you set that, it causes a lot of confusion and panic in the sector.
Yeah. I'm happy that there are a lot of progress happening actually on the ground, and this doesn't end without any challenges. So Farah, can you tell us about the challenges when you look at designing a building or a community, considering the healthy aspects and sustainability aspects?
Thank you for the question. So when we design climate-sensitive buildings, we look at how to integrate climate in terms of passive design, comfortable design into our buildings. And I think today you got a good glimpse that we are doing quite well on this. But I want to take a step back. We are in the middle of a climate and biodiversity emergency. That means the global climate is changing. This summer I was in Rome, and 2 particular days in Rome was hotter than Dubai, those 2 days. And I think many people experience this. Yeah. So as the climate changes, we need to start looking at how to make our buildings more comfortable, which we are doing quite well, but we also need to think about what's happening outside of the building, spaces in between buildings. Guy, who was in the previous panel, talked about some really good principles and the city of Medina, which is a really good example to learn from, and City Walk here in Dubai, to understand as cities grow, cities, buildings overshadow each other, and there is a way of understanding the public realm design and how to increase comfortable spaces. I think Expo was a good example. There was quite a good public realm walkability design was incorporated. So I think the question about climate and how do we address climate in terms of design is changing. Right now there's a lot of innovative solutions out there and a lot of good designers out there who are thinking outside the box. The way we used to design buildings 10, 20 years ago is going to change rapidly, especially with the effects of climate change, effects of technology, effects of the new younger generation. So understanding how incorporating climate in a positive way, both inside of our buildings and exterior, is quite important. And I think that answers your question, because there's a lot of opportunities and solutions. And I think all the challenges we face here and in other climatic solutions like this can be converted into good opportunities.
Yeah, that's great. That's great that there is a lot of challenges, but there are also a lot of solutions which available within the market that we can adopt in order to overcome those obstacles. And when talking about challenges, there is always a bright part on the market and the industry. And this question for you, Mario, if you can give us an overview, how you find the movement taking place within the market on the healthy and sustainable buildings, looking at both new developments and also the existing buildings.
Thank you, Haithem, and pleasure to be here. I'm going to actually talk a bit about the commercial aspect, because the easier part is to talk about how convenient are the healthy strategies and everything else, but usually the tricky part is the commercial part. So let's talk about the elephant in the room, which is always the commercial side. How much does it make sense, to go for these kinds of healthy design strategies, whether for new or existing? So definitely from an investment point of view, there is a compelling business case there. I'm going to tell you why. From one hand, recently the increased demand for buildings to go for healthy strategies and to achieve more robust health and well-being standards and regulations is definitely there. And you can see it from the internal policies and the internal regulations that is there in every single tenant or company or organization, that is not just now looking for the conventional no smoking policy or the conventional kind of internal policies for health and well-being. They are definitely going more and more towards the more advanced kinds of specific healthy and specific regulations that tackle everything that I think beyond 2020 is more obvious to everyone now. Because I think 2020 by itself was definitely a pivotal year for everyone out there. People started to focus more on indoor environmental quality and the different factors that affect this, and whether residents or commercial tenants, they're looking more and more now towards healthy workplaces. So when you as a developer, even you as ICD Brookfield, when you are offering your tenants this infrastructure that is allowing them to be aligned with their own sustainability policy, health and well-being policies, you will definitely have differentiator over other developers. So from a business point of view, it's definitely compelling. It raises and increases the value of your asset as a building. You are future-proofing your building as well for not just the climate change, but also anything that comes with the indoor environmental quality challenges. And of course, at the same time, if you look at it from an insurance point of view, from an insurance market point of view, you're also enjoying a lower insurance risk for your developments. Now, of course, existing buildings is a more challenging thing, but we are seeing more and more now existing buildings, because they want to attract the tier 1 and the tier 2 tenants, they want to focus on not just sustainability, but also health and well-being strategies. This is from one end. From the other end, And I think this was also discussed many times during the day. If you look at the studies from all of the research centers, the universities, talking about the strong link between offering a healthy workplace and increasing the productivity. So you can go up to 20% increase in productivity from focusing on the different factors that are aligned with indoor environmental quality, acoustics, human comfort, temperature, and we're actually also seeing this because of the increased amount of RFPs that we're getting as a consultancy related to indoor air quality testing, acoustics testing, etc., so that you can actually not more or less future-proof your existing asset so that you can attract these kinds of younger generations, as Farah actually said. And these younger generation, I think also they're questioning more and more now the healthy workplaces, and is your organization actually a good place to work in, regardless of the other typical kind of questions.
Yeah, it's really great listening at insights from three of you, giving me the feeling that there are more responsibility and a lot of things that we really need to consider. And let's go back and dive deeper into the UAE National Wellbeing Strategy. Within the strategy, there were specific 9 strategic objectives. From your perspective, which one of them you find it more challenging and which one you feel like it's more easable and achievable within those strategic objectives? Should we start with you, Farah?
So the 11 objectives that's mentioned on the strategy, if we take a deep dive into them, we find that many of them are already being adopted in many of the buildings. But what the strategy provides is a framework that brings everything together, which is fantastic. Now, I couldn't find one that I can say this is very difficult to achieve, because everything is about health, well-being, and the future generation. But there's one particular strategy which really struck me. It talks about life skills, developing good life skills, and I think that's so important for our future generation. Because the generations we're leaving ahead of us, they have to battle climate change in a different way that we are battling today. So those strategies, and for future generation, I think the well-being strategy kind of brings together a framework. And especially as Dubai, we want to become the happiest city, the most sustainable city.
Exactly.
So adopting the strategy as part of our public sector, private sector for all sorts of buildings, I think it would really create a very good framework. There's another strategy that talks about the digitization and monitoring and tracking. I think that's very important. If we can't monitor anything, track anything, it's very hard to measure success. So it's good to have that tracking part of that strategy, because we can measure ourselves where we are in 5 to 10 years' time. So I think all of them are possible. We're already working on it. The idea is how to go beyond it and make it more day-to-day conversation, because awareness, knowledge, education is so important in this kind of conversation.
Yeah, and this takes us to that. One of the principles is that there should be a proper integration and drafted roles and responsibilities between the different entities from government, private sector, and also people's efforts was identified as one of the entities. Saeed, from your point of view within the 9 strategic objectives.
I'll start with maybe just overall my sort of observation around the challenges of implementation, and then maybe one specific sort of aspect which I see as also challenging. I mean, I've been involved in a number of national strategies, probably the UAE Vision 2021, which over 12 years ago we worked on. And, a big challenge with that, and particularly with any national vision, is it's set at that federal, high-level, national sort of level, through the Prime Minister's office, a particular instance. And you're relying on, say, 50, 60 government departments to cascade that implementation through. So it's really challenging getting all of those aligned, all the implementation, all the metrics to report back up and down, monitor, report, etc. And then the level below that is you then need to get the private sector, how those objectives cascade through. Because the strategy is great on its own, but unless you get all those stakeholders involved, aligned, and you're tracking, reporting, monitoring all the way through, it doesn't get achieved. With this particular strategy vision, when you're talking about people's life skills, talking about positive mindsets, talking about active lifestyles, you then also go a level below that, and you're actually going down to the individual. because without the participation, engagement, and ownership of the strategy by the individual, the private sector and government departments can do, all the things. We can set up cycle paths. We can create a private sector, startup can come and create the, bikes for rent and all these aspects. But if people don't use it, then that benefit isn't achieved. So I think a real challenge here is actually that engagement piece of engaging all the way down to the individual. And it's not just, oh, let's get, people in the workplace involved. You're talking about children, elderly, citizens, non-citizens, tourists. It's sort of cross-sectoral. So this is a really ambitious and very sort of forward-thinking strategy, and I think that's going to be a particularly key success factor. The second part, which to me is also going to be a challenge, is the role of the digital aspect, and that's, I guess, one particular objective within this. And when you talk about health and wellness, obviously digital aspects can enable it. It can make better access to job opportunities, better access to health and wellness and everything else. But the big elephant in the room is that the digital world is also what's contributing a lot to people's mental health issues, about unhappiness, families not having those connections, friends not being connected and having that human contact. And I think when we're talking about health and wellness, mental well-being, we also need to be careful of that double-edged sword with the digital aspect. That yes, it's there to enable, but it's not there to sort of actually create divides between sort of human contact. And I think that's something quite key in achieving those goals.
Yeah, I totally agree about the crucial part related to the strategic cascading, and because of the strategy was set in a vertical and horizontal way, that it makes it not that easy to be implemented. And I believe the how this will reflect through the entire entities in order to assure that every single one involved in this to be able to deliver what is expected. And what, from your perspective, Mario, on the strategic objectives within the strategy?
Well, I think already Farah and Saeed, tackled many important issues. But I would say, going back to the individual part that Saeed talked about, I think one of the very challenging strategies is the mental well-being, because from a physical well-being point of view, and there is also one strategy regarding, promoting active and healthy lifestyle, which I think is very much achievable, because especially, with the recent initiatives, whether on the, individual case or even on the, the public figures case. I mean, His Highness Sheikh Hamdan every now and then, calls for marathons, Dubai runs, etc. And, this is one of the very simple initiatives, but that has a very, big effect at the level of, Dubai city overall. When it comes to mental well-being, I think this is going to be the most challenging one, because, I mean, we shouldn't forget that we're living in a city that, first, most of the people are expats. They're away from home. They have very high living expenses. There's many things that, add up to their daily stress, I would say. So this is part of, how you can actually tackle this issue, aside from the fact that, if you're laid out of your company or your job, it's also an additional stress on you. Now, of course, it's very, nice to hear about the recent UAE unemployment visa, which I think gives a very good push towards the overall mental well-being of people and removes a bit of the stress. But still, I think this part is going to be very challenging moving forward. Another strategy that also caught my attention was the connected communities, because I think in Dubai, there's still a lack of, let's say, the proper definition of communities, at the level of cities. Even you could be, living in an apartment in a 40-story tower, you don't even know any one of your neighbors, let alone, the whole street or the whole neighborhood. So when it comes to connected communities and this social cohesion, I think this is something extremely challenging to reach. Of course, when you talk about new developments, and many gentlemen already previously tackled this, it's very important to always take this into account. How to make sure that you're not just building units, developments, you're also building a community. So you have this social interaction between the different people living there in this community. You have a central community center. You have the different assets that allow for this social cohesion. It's challenging, but it's definitely, achievable. It's going to take some time. But I think this is something to always keep
Yeah.
in mind.
I'm glad, Mario, that you touched base on our last question on the panel today related to our focus on commercial buildings and what's happening on the residential buildings and the communities. So that was your point of view. Just lastly, if you can listen to commercial versus residential from you, Farah and Saeed, and close the panel today.
The conversation we had today is very much detailed about that. And as owners, occupiers, we really need to come forward and make the story. You know, what's the story we're creating for our future generation?
You wanna have some water more? Sorry. Are you okay to continue?
Yes, I'm fine, thank you. It's the cough. So we are creating a legacy for the future generation. And I think we must remember that the decisions we're making today is creating a blueprint for our future generation. So understanding the commercial aspects, the business case of sustainability and the value creation is so important. There are lots of studies globally, and I think yet in this region, we need to develop a few more commercial case studies and tell the story in a very nice way to inspire. Because leading by example and seeing other people's doing it creates a positive competition. And I think that will shift the market and the thinking, because it's a mindset shift. I think a few years now, we might have the same conversation, and we might talk about brilliant case studies of how the commercialization of health and well-being has reached the epitome.
Agree.
Yes.
Agree, totally agree.
And globally it's happening, and here it's just about to happen. We just need to come together and have those case studies in front of us.
And we need to enforce it and actually motivate it. So commercial versus residential side. When you look at the residential buildings, do you think that there is still a gap from the industry? You need to focus on the residential buildings from well-being perspective.
No, I definitely agree, and I think when you talk about sustainability or well-being, there is still a gap between residential and commercial. Commercial is definitely leading the way, and it's something we do need to tackle, and it's a very simple reason. You know, the decisions to rent an office space or purchase an office space in the commercial space is being done by commercial real estate teams, professionals in that space, and that's their job to select a good office space, and they're aware of what's the sustainability metric, what's the well-being metric, quality metrics. Whereas if you take the residential sector, it's done by individuals who don't have access to that information. They're not from that sort of training, that background, and we really need to bridge that gap. We just need to make the decision making simple. We need to make sure there's standardized metrics which are used across the industry for people to make those informed decisions. Be able to provide that information in a clear, transparent way so that tenants, people in the residential sector, whether it's home buyers or tenants, can make decisions based on transparent, auditable, correct information rather than through marketing information. Yeah. I think that's key, and there is a gap, and it has been there on the sustainable building or net zero building space as well. But I think there's enough tools now that we can cascade it through, whether it's through rating schemes that the Delos provide, or whether it's through metrics that the government's providing disclosure on from the land department, star ratings and things like that. But a key thing is making sure that we're able to provide very clear, simple information to that sector.
Yeah, I believe the movement is happening and moving more into the residential part, which I believe that it will be for the benefit of our families and everyone living in Dubai and UAE. I would like to thank you so much for your valuable insights today. Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody.